In today's video, we're carrying on the How to Become an IFA series, and today's exam is R04. We're digging into pensions and retirement planning. This textbook, I believe from memory, is the thickest textbook you will get of all the RO exams. And because of that, it's obviously quite a challenging exam because pensions historically have changed so much, and clients will still come to you with old historic pensions, so nothing is outdated, which is why it's so tricky. Because of that, you will need the recommended 50 hours of study time, maybe even more than that if you have limited pension experience, which you might well do. Whereas on the other hand, if you already have some admin or pension experience because of the job that you do, that will help you in your learning. So just bear that in mind when you're picking up this textbook. Not only does R04 look at the different types of pensions, it looks at the historic pensions, the different types you could have held in the past. It looks at final salary or defined benefit pensions, more modern and more up-to-date pensions. It also looks at state benefits, state pensions, and different credits that you could be entitled to, as well as how you can access your pension income when you actually get to retirement. So there are lots of different areas that it looks at, and it also includes HMRC tax rules. And for most people, this isn't an idea of fun, I'm afraid, but you will need to know this information if you want to pass the exam successfully. Unfortunately, although this is a tough exam, it's only 10 credits, and it's 50 questions for a 1-hour exam. There will be 39 single response questions and 11 multiple response questions, and I'll give you a quick example of the differences between those shortly. The nominal pass mark is 65%, so you'll need to answer around 33 questions to successfully pass it. So that's good to know in advance so you can focus your knowledge on certain areas that you perhaps aren't so clued up on. There are 8 learning outcomes for R04, and I'll just go through them now and tell you how many questions will be attributable to each learning outcome. So first of all, number 1, understand the political, economic and social environmental factors which provide the context for pension planning. That's 5 standard format questions. Number 2, understand how the HMRC tax regime applies to pension planning. That's 10 standard format questions. Number 3, understand the relevant aspects of pensions law and regulation to pension planning. That's 4 standard format questions. Number 4, understand the structure, characteristics and application of defined benefit schemes to an individual's pension planning. That is 7 standard format questions. Number 5, analyse the range of defined contribution scheme options as they apply to an individual's pension planning. That's 4 standard format questions and 2 multiple response questions. Number 6, analyse the options and factors to consider for drawing pension benefits. That's 5 standard format questions and 4 multiple response questions. Number 7, explain the structure, relevance and application of state schemes to an individual's pension planning. That's 4 standard format questions. And last but not least, evaluate the aims and objectives of retirement planning, including the relevant investment issues. And that is 5 multiple response questions. So you can see from that list, there are some questions that are just going to be standard format questions. And a standard format question essentially has one question and then 4 or 5 different options, but only one of those options is correct. And most of the questions in R04 will be that format, so only one option will be correct. But some questions will be multiple response, and you will get told when you get to the point in the exam that this becomes the case. And with a multiple response question, you have your question and you get 4 or 5 different options, but more than one of those answers is correct, and you have to determine by process of elimination which ones are correct and which ones are not. These are extremely tricky because anywhere between 2 and 4 of the options can be correct. It's always more than 2, and it's never all of the options. So you're looking at sort of 2 to 4 probably are going to be the correct options. But it's really tricky, so make sure you read the questions because every element of a question will determine which ones are correct and which ones are not. So do make sure you leave enough time at the end of the exam for these, and make sure you just pay attention to what you're being asked and make sure you're answering the question you are being asked. So let's dig into some study tips now. As with all exams, you should work smarter, not harder, and it's about the quality, not the quantity. So you need to know how you work, what exam preparation works best for you, but also what areas to focus on, and I'll be able to give you a breakdown of what chapters you should focus your knowledge on because that will help you prepare. Also, make sure you use past papers. So the CII have past papers available on their website. If you go to the qualifications section, you can generally download the past 1 or 2 exam papers and have a go at them. You can maybe do that at the start of your preparation as well, so you can identify gaps in your knowledge from the word go, and then have another go when you're halfway through your exam preparation to see if you've plugged those gaps or to see how well you're doing. And it's always advisable to do them under timed conditions so you can see under exam conditions how you would do. So that's always advisable to kind of kick your exam preparation off, is to just have a go off the bat and just see how you get on. Now there are some key chapters to focus on here, and those are chapters 2, 6, 7 and 8, because the R04 exam questions are not allocated equally across each chapter. So if time is short, I would suggest you focus on those chapters, because those chapters will give you the majority of the marks in the exam. So those 4 chapters not only account for over half of the multiple response questions in the exam, which are the trickier ones, but they also account for over half of the overall questions in the R04 exam. So in other words, you'll be unlikely to pass R04 unless you can really answer those questions correctly for all of those chapters. Some other chapters to focus on as well are chapters 5, 6 and 8. So there is a little bit of an overlap there, because all of the multiple response questions come from those chapters. So as I said, they are the trickiest questions, so make sure you squat up on those chapters in particular, because those will be the multiple response questions. So as I said before, the HMRC tax regime will feature in the R04 exam, so that will be in the textbook as well. Now, a lot of people will struggle with this because it's very technical, but please do not worry too much about it. Only around 10 questions out of the 50 will have an element of the tax regime in it, so please don't spend all of your time focusing on that, although it is an area you need to know. Also, you're only likely to get asked some areas of the tax regime because it's so complex that examiners cannot ask you in a multiple choice exam to work out complex tax calculations. So you'll likely only get elements of tax questions in each question. It's always important to focus on what you don't know. So you might be encouraged by reading the textbook and figuring out that you know certain chapters, and that's great, but don't then focus on what you already know and repeat the knowledge you already have. That's pointless. If you already have that knowledge, that's brilliant, but you need to then identify the areas that you don't have that knowledge in, or that you perhaps have no idea and you've never addressed before. So really hone in your studying and make sure you're focusing on those particular areas that you aren't familiar with or you have never come across before. And last but not least, it's better to study in short bursts than it is to sit down and sit for hours and hours on end and try and cram as much in as you can. There's no point in plugging yourself up with caffeine and cramming before the exam as well. That's not advisable either. So really sort of 15 to 20 minute bursts is the most helpful way to do it. So do sort of short session of 15 to 20 minutes and then go and do something that's not very challenging. So go and make yourself a cup of tea or make some lunch, and when your brain's turned off, you'll actually soak in some more of that information that you've just been learning, and your brain will process it better. And then you can go back and have another 15 to 20 minute session once you've let that soak in for say 10 minutes. So sort of do it in an hour, maybe two slots of learning with a short break in between, and then you can build up a study plan and stick to that. Now let's take a look at how to study and the best ways to retain the knowledge that you're reading. If you're someone that likes visual learning, then things like mind maps or spider charts might be really helpful, because if you can put that information into a visual form, then you're more likely to retain it, and it will help you to remember charts or spider diagrams and things like that. So know your learning style and then tailor-make your studying to that particular learning style. If you're struggling to retain some information in particular, then something I did here recently that was quite a good exam tip that I found was pick up an inanimate object, a child's teddy bear, the doll you have lying around, or any toy really, and try and put your learning or what you've learned into your own words and explain to that object how a particular thing works, whether that's a type of pension or a tax regime or anything like that. It might seem ridiculous when you do it, but actually in the exam, you'll remember that situation, and it should help to cement that with you because you'll have remembered it in a particular setting. That will help cement it in your brain. If visual memory is not your thing and you actually work better with words, then try and build stories around what you're trying to learn. And then stories are a lot easier to remember than textbooks and paragraphs of writing. So then you'll be able to remember those more easily, especially if you put character names in or certain things that you particularly like or that you like hobbies of. So build characters and stories around the objects and the circumstances that you're trying to remember. Another good one is to try and make up songs to go with your learning, whether that's making them up on your own or putting lyrics to songs or tunes that you already know. I mean, who doesn't know the favourite song lyrics? And you don't really set out to learn those, do you? But they just get really stuck in your head and you can remember them for decades and decades. So if you can try and make your learning more fun for you and just try and put your learning into lyrics, then it'll be a lot easier for you to just sing those back to yourself while you're in the exam, and hopefully that will help you out. Last but not least, a really, really helpful one is to try and learn on the go. So those dead pockets of time you get where you're commuting or you're at the gym, you're going for a run, try and use those pockets of time to either have an audiobook, try to recall some of the things that you've learnt, or take your textbook with you if you're sitting on a train and you're commuting somewhere. There are really good pockets of time that you can use, so you're not saving up all of your spare time for the end of the day when you get home from work and you're tired and you're thinking, oh, I've got to put aside an hour every night to do this. There are really, really good pockets you can use to make your learning more effective. So now let's move on to exam tips. As I said, it's a 50 question exam with 1 hour. So you have just over a minute per question. So make sure you're breaking each question down and understanding what you are being asked, especially with the multiple response ones. There is never any useless information in a CII exam question, so make sure you know exactly what you're being asked to do. The number of questions that involve calculations tends to be less than 10, and because it's a multiple choice exam and you only have just over a minute per question, you are unlikely to be asked any long, complex calculations. You'll probably have parts of calculations or to include certain elements of calculations in your answers, but you won't be asked to do long, complex calculations. Some of the calculations you should expect to come up though are being able to calculate the commutation factor on a defined benefit pension and the tax liability on pension income or death benefits. There is no negative marking in CII exams, so if you really have no idea, take a guess. I find the best thing to do is to go through the exam from questions 1 to 50, answer every question. Even if you're not sure, just put any question, just in case you get to the end and you run out of time, at least you would have had a guess. You can flag questions you don't know. So answer every question, but ones you're not sure on, flag them up. And then if you get to the end and you've got time, you can go back to those flagged questions. But it's always worth having a guess because you will not get marked down just for guessing. The exam questions tend to focus on mainstream areas. So these tend to be final salary pensions, automatic enrolment, pension scheme death benefits, pension contribution limits, and the lifetime allowance, as well as the various methods of accessing pensions. I know that sounds like a lot, but that will make up the bulk of the questions for the exam. And last but not least, the CII examiners, they tend to be reasonable people. So if you've only got 50 questions and 60 minutes to do an exam, they're not going to ask you ridiculous long complex questions, whether that involves calculations or other areas. So they should be asking you to do sensible questions within the time limits, but just make sure that you're being efficient with your time and that you're answering every question as you go through. I hope that's been helpful, guys. If you're doing your R04 soon, then good luck. If you've got any questions, please let me know. But otherwise, I'll see you next month for the next video.